I've been studying an empire that simply ceased to exist. In 1917, Russia was still ruled by a Tsar. Tsar Nicholas II held absolute power over millions. But his people were exhausted, hungry, and desperate. World War I had drained Russia almost completely. Bread queues stretched for blocks in frozen Petrograd. Factory workers went on strike across the whole city. And the army refused to fire on the protesters. Nicholas abdicated. The Tsar was simply gone. Two rival governments now claimed to rule Russia. Then Lenin arrived. Everything was about to change. He climbed onto an armored car and spoke to thousands. His Bolshevik party flooded the streets with newspapers. The July days, protests shook the city again. The provisional government was collapsing fast. On October 25th, the Bolsheviks stormed the palace. The ministers surrendered. The revolution had succeeded. Lenin declared a Soviet government. The world watched. But immediately civil war broke out across Russia. Red Army versus White Army, 3 brutal years. The Bolsheviks eventually won, at immense cost. Millions had died. Cities lay wrecked and emptied. Famine gripped the countryside. People starved in millions. Lenin introduced the new economic policy, a compromise. Markets reopened. The economy breathed again, barely. In 1922, the Soviet Union was officially born. 15 republics, 1/6 of all the world's land. But Lenin was sick. He suffered repeated strokes. Stalin and Trotsky circled each other like wolves. Lenin died in January 1924. The struggle exploded. Stalin outmaneuvered every rival with cold patience. Trotsky was exiled, his influence erased entirely. Stalin's image was placed in every classroom and office. He launched the 5-year plans, industrialize now. Dams, steel mills, power stations rose from nothing. Whole cities were built in the middle of nowhere. But collectivization destroyed the peasant way of life. Ukraine's famine, the Holodomor, killed millions. The secret police, the NKVD, worked through the night. The Great Purge trials began, show trials and confessions. Hundreds of thousands were shot in the purges. The Gulag swallowed millions, labor camps everywhere. Yet Moscow was being rebuilt into Stalin's showcase. The metro opened. Even its stations looked like palaces. State radio blasted propaganda into every Soviet home. In 1939, Stalin signed a pact with Nazi Germany. The Soviets invaded Poland from the east that same month. The Winter War against Finland shocked the world. Then June 22, 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. 4 million soldiers crossed the border in hours. Stalin was paralyzed for days. He could not respond. Soviet armies collapsed. Millions were taken prisoner. German troops reached the suburbs of Moscow itself. Moscow citizens dug tank traps with their bare hands. Then the Red Army counterattacked in December's frost. Stalingrad became the bloodiest battle in all history. Street by street, building by building, room by room. The Soviets encircled 300,000 German troops. Field Marshal Paulus surrendered. The tide had turned. Kursk in 1943, the largest tank battle ever fought. May 1945, Soviet soldiers raised their flag on Berlin. The victory parade in Moscow was unlike anything before. But 27 million Soviets had died. The land was shattered. At Yalta, the powers had divided up the post-war world. An iron curtain fell across the middle of Europe. In 1949, the Soviets tested their first atomic bomb. The Cold War had America and the Soviets watching each other. Stalin grew more paranoid as he aged. Nobody was safe. In 1953, his guards found him collapsed on the floor. Stalin was dead, The entire Soviet system went quiet. Khrushchev denounced Stalin's crimes. The hall went silent. Hungary revolted. Soviet tanks crushed the uprising. In 1957, Sputnik entered orbit. The space race was on. And Gagarin flew into space in 1961. Unbelievable. All of Moscow celebrated in the streets that day. The U-2 spy plane incident nearly started a war. Then Cuba, Soviet missiles 90 miles from Florida. Kennedy and Khrushchev both stood on the nuclear edge. The missiles were removed. The world exhaled. Khrushchev was removed in 1964. No blood, just politics. Brezhnev ruled for 18 years of comfortable stagnation. The economy stalled. Production numbers were faked. Shop shelves were often completely empty. Underground samizdat literature spread ideas quietly. Prague, spring 1968, crushed by Soviet tanks again. The Soviets backed Vietnam, Africa, every proxy conflict. Moscow hosted the 1980 Olympics, then America boycotted. December 1979, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. Afghan fighters using mountain terrain made it impossible. 10 years of war. 15,000 Soviet soldiers died there. In Poland, the Solidarity movement terrified Moscow. Brezhnev died in 1982. Then two more leaders quickly. Andropov, then Chernenko, funerals in quick succession. Soviet media kept insisting everything was going perfectly. Soviet technology was falling years behind the West. 1985, Gorbachev took power. He was different immediately. Glasnost, openness. Suddenly people could speak freely. Then Chernobyl exploded in April 1986. The accident exposed how broken Soviet systems truly were. Baltic states began demanding their independence loudly. Coal miners in Siberia went on strike, unthinkable before. November 1989, the Berlin Wall simply fell. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, all broke free. Gorbachev let them go. He refused to send the tanks. Inside the Soviet Union, republics demanded independence now. The economy was in free fall. Shops had almost nothing. August 1991, hardliners attempted a coup against Gorbachev. Crowds defended the parliament building with their bodies. The coup collapsed. The plotters' hands literally shook. Citizens toppled the statue of the KGB's founder. On Christmas Day, 1991, Gorbachev signed the Union away. The red flag came down. The Russian flag went up. 15 countries now existed where one had been before. Russia was suddenly free, and completely unprepared for it. Oligarchs grabbed state industries worth billions overnight. Veterans who won a world war couldn't afford bread. Chechnya declared independence. Russia went to war. Apartment bombings in 1999 shocked all of Russia. Vladimir Putin took power as the new millennium began. The Soviet past and the present exist side by side still. The Soviet system shaped the lives of 300 million people. They built space stations. They decoded the atom. They produced world-class art, music, literature, ballet. And they also built enough weapons to end civilization. The Gulag Memorial now stands where torture was ordered. How Russia teaches this history keeps changing constantly. Some see glory. Others see only the terror. Cities built under the Soviets are still people's homes. Across 15 countries, the Soviet footprint never left. 11 time zones. One country once controlled all of this. Lenin's body still lies in the mausoleum today. Kazakhstan, a Soviet republic, is now a major oil nation. Georgia now looks west toward Europe instead. Ukraine fought for its own identity and paid in blood. Kazakhstan gave up nuclear weapons. Few nations ever did that. The Trans-Siberian Railway they built still runs today. Samarkand existed long before the Soviets and after them. Russians today debate what the Soviet era even meant. The next generation is still figuring out what happened. Soviet architecture still dominates entire city skylines. Today, museums try to hold the entire story at once. Victory in World War II is still their greatest pride. Even rusting playgrounds carry the Soviet story inside them. Baikonur still launches rockets into orbit right now. Cosmonauts returned from space to a country that was gone. Moscow today is still defined by what it once was. Archives are still being opened. New truths still emerge. Survivors are still alive. The last ones are leaving us. What do you carry forward? What do you leave behind? The Soviet Union existed for exactly 69 years, from 1922 to 1991. It rose and it fell. 300 million people shaped by the same experiment. The land itself outlasted every ideology they imposed. Russian cosmonauts still serve on the International Space Station. The church survived 70 years underground and came back. Soviet cartoons and characters are still beloved across Russia. Soviet circus arts were the best in the world. Still are. For most people, it was ordinary life. It always is. The boy from a small village became the first human in space. From 1917 to 1991, 74 years of history. Some former republics want to forget. Others never can. Belarus still displays the Soviet flag, still. Georgia has the ancient city of Tbilisi and a proud identity. 3 generations at one table see 3 different histories. Red Square still stops people in their tracks. The Hermitage holds more art than anyone can see in a lifetime. Russia, the place, outlasts Russia, the idea, every time. The steppe people had their own world before the Soviets came. The Katyn massacre, 22,000 Polish officers shot by Soviets. They diverted rivers and killed the Aral Sea completely. Norilsk was built by Gulag labor. It still exists. The Bolshoi theater survived revolution and war and Stalin. Nuclear submarines rusted at docks after the fall. Remote mountain villages simply outlived the whole ideology. The parades showed power. The reality was different. The Soviet republics had ancient cultures long before Moscow. Estonia joined NATO and the EU. Remarkable transformation. Young Russians grew up with no memory of the Soviet state. Pripyat stands abandoned and frozen in 1986 still. Russia still maintains one of Earth's largest nuclear arsenals. Armenia's Met Ararat is in Turkey, yet it's on their flag. The Baltic states speak languages Moscow tried to suppress. They landed probes on Venus. That happened. Soviet physical education methods are still used globally. Millions of Soviets grew up in these identical apartment blocks. The AK-47, the Soviet weapon that changed all warfare. Ukraine was the breadbasket of the whole Soviet Union. Solzhenitsyn's writing documented what the state tried to hide. Soviet citizens were proud of the pre-revolutionary culture too. The Soviets turned the Kazakh steppe into farmland. Those who lived through it remember something irreplaceable. The books disagree. The debates never end. I kept coming back to one question while studying all of this. How do 300 million ordinary lives become a single story? They even shaped how their children saw the world's geography. Even in their final decade, they hosted the world. Most people just lived, loved, worked, worried, like us. The worker and kolkhoz woman, still standing, still proud. The land remains. The story refuses to end. I studied this for months. I still have more questions than answers.